Hello and welcome back to the Import Export Hub channel, everybody. Bias Bogdan here, your host for the next couple of agonizing minutes. I hope that you're all doing great. And guys, without prolonging too much this intro, let's jump into the main topic here and allow me to present you Thailand's main imports and exports, together, of course, with its main trading partners. But before that, some quick facts about Thailand. So, with almost 70 million inhabitants, Thailand is considered an upper middle income country. It's the second largest economy in the ASEAN region after Indonesia, with a GDP of roughly $506 billion for 2021, in which services make up for the bulk of it, about 55%. Relative to the main trading partners in what concerns Thailand's exports, the United States are the largest trading partner. It's followed by Japan, and we have China on the third spot. While in terms of imports, we have basically the same trading partners, but this time the list is reversed, if you want, as China is the main one, is followed by Japan, and then we have the United States on the third spot. Relative to the logistics performance, Thailand scores relatively well for 2018, which is the last update of the index. It had a score of 3.41, with customs and infrastructure as weak points, if you want. But I think that things have improved in the meantime. And finally, another thing that I wanted to cover in this short introduction is the inflow of foreign direct investments. And here I've prepared a nice pie chart coming from OECD. I think it stands for the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, if I'm not wrong. For the cumulative sum of foreign direct investments flows between 2010 and 2017, quite old, but still, and we see here that Japan, the United States, and Singapore were the main sources of foreign direct investments, while China contributed with some 5%. And I have another chart for you, again covering Thailand's flow of foreign direct investments, which personally I found interesting. I've added also Viet Nam as a comparison, and what I can say here is that we have these three groups of more than three consecutive years of upward trends, if you want. So between 1987 and 1990, the second group is between 1994 and 1998, and the last one from 2002 until 2006. And from then onwards, we see a lot of volatility culminating with 2020, who saw $4.85 billion divestitures, caused most probably by the COVID pandemic and Thailand's over-reliance on the tourism sector. But anyways, what I wanted to point out here, and that's why I've added Vietnam as comparison, is the trend and not necessarily the volume of foreign direct investments inflows. And here, Vietnam, if you ask me, is better placed to take advantage of the so-called China Plus One strategy in terms of manufacturing and sourcing. And you can see this in Thailand's foreign direct investments inflow volatility from 2008 onwards, which is related to the service sector, while Vietnam's flows are related to the manufacturing one. And that's why I say that Vietnam is better placed to take advantage of this China Plus One trend. Anyways, time will tell how things will evolve there. So I will get back to my Excel file here, and I will start with Thailand's overall exports, which in 2021 amounted to some $267.5 billion, which is almost 17% more than in 2020 and well above the pre-pandemic values, with high-ranked chapters here as the top performers. So we have chapter 84, 95, and 78, followed by the rubber and plastics chapter. And then we have precious and semi-precious stones, mineral fuels, edible fruits and nuts. And the top 10 list finishes with organic chemicals, having some $5.6 billion worth of exports. In terms of cumulative value, these top 10 chapters make up for almost 71%, so not that concentrated, while in terms of year-on-year changes, there are just two chapters here in this top 10 list who experienced contractions. So chapter 71 and 16 down with 45 and 8.5% respectively. And guys, these were Thailand's main exports for 2021. And now let's take a look also at the other flows, so the imports, the overall imports. And we see that for 2021, there were some $269 billion worth of imports, with chapter 87, 27, and 84 as the top performers, which were followed by the iron and steel sector, precious or semi-precious metals, plastics, vehicles. Then we have chapter 73, 74, and the top 10 list ends with chapter 90 with some $6.3 billion worth of imports. In terms of year-on-year changes, we have an overall increase of 29%, with all the top 10 chapters here having positive changes. As for the balance of trade, we have $1.6 billion negative balance of trade, so more imports than exports, with three chapters in this top 10 list having a positive balance of trade. And these are the machinery and mechanical appliances chapter, almost $15 billion positive balance of trade. Plastics and articles thereof with $4.8 billion. And lastly, we see some $21.5 billion positive balance of trade for the vehicles chapter, thanks to the numerous auto assembly plants based in Thailand. And now, guys, with both the import and export flows being covered, let's take a look at the trading partners as well, focusing on the top 5 chapters from each flow. And I will start with export flow. We have here the top performer, so chapter 84, which in 2021 performed quite well, some $44 billion worth of exports, well above the pre-pandemic levels, with the United States, China, and Hong Kong as the main partners, which were followed by others like, I don't know, Japan, Singapore, or India, to name just a few from this top 10 list. In what concerns the year-on-year change, the overall exports went up with 19% in relative terms and some $7.2 billion in absolute ones, with almost all top 10 trading partners registering positive changes, except Viet Nam here, who in 2021 imported with some $108 million less than it did in 2020. The United States, on the other hand, registered the largest absolute change, some $1.6 billion, but we see also good performances coming from, I don't know, Indonesia and China as well, both with figures above the $500 million mark. As for Thailand's main export drivers, well, towards the United States, we have heading 8471, so automatic data processing machines and units thereof, while towards Japan, we have printing machinery, so we're talking about heading 8443. Moving now to Thailand's second biggest export driver, we have here chapter 85. We see again exports in the range of $40 billion, with almost the same top 3 partners as we saw in the previous chapter. So the United States, Japan, and Hong Kong. Japan here switching places with China. Relative to the year-on-year changes, we have almost 18% positive change in relative terms and some $6 billion in absolute ones, with the United States clearly dominating again the year-on-year changes, as we have, I don't know, $2.1 billion more imports relative to 2020. And personally, I think that the so-called China Plus One mantra that flooded the media in 2022 lags at least 1 year if you look closely at the changes coming from these two chapters. And what I'm trying to say here is that companies who had a strategic view in terms of supply chain resilience and who understood the basics of geopolitics, took action in late 2020 and early 2021, if not sooner, considering the time needed to relocate some of the production. So from my side, hats down to those managers who understood that China plus one is a necessity much earlier than other pundits. Anyways, in terms of the main drivers, unfortunately for this chapter, we have just one for both China and Malaysia. So we're talking about heading 8542 electronic integrated circuits. Jumping now, guys, to Thailand's third largest export driver for 2021. We see here chapter 87, so vehicles basically, with $31.7 billion worth of exports, in which Australia, here Japan and the United States were the main destinations. But of course we have other important partners like, I don't know, the Philippines, New Zealand or Mexico, to name a couple from this top 10 list. And except here the United States, who in 2021 registered a 15% contraction, the rest of them had positive changes. The largest absolute change happening here in relation with Australia, who increased its imports from Thailand with $1.6 billion. As we can see here, Thailand's exports from this chapter are mostly concentrated within the ASEAN network, except the United States and Mexico, of course, so quite regional. It makes sense given the nature of the products being manufactured and exported. And guys, speaking of products, we have here also the main drivers. And in the case of Australia, heading 8704, so motor vehicles for the transport of goods, drove most of Thailand's exports. While towards Vietnam, we have motor cars and other motor vehicles designed specifically for the transport of persons. So we're having here heading 8703. Moving now to the fourth biggest export driver, we have here chapter 40. So rubber and articles thereof, with $19.7 billion worth of exports for 2021. And we see that the United States, China and Malaysia are the main destinations, followed by other important ones like Japan, Germany or Brazil, to name just a few from this top 10 list. Relative to the year-on-year changes, the overall exports from this chapter were up 27.5% in relative terms and almost $4.3 billion in absolute ones, with the United States having the largest year-on-year absolute change of roughly $1.2 billion. All top 10 partners had positive changes, either bouncing back to pre-pandemic levels or even more in some cases. And my guess is that the ongoing problems in China will make Thailand a very, very attractive destination for the tire manufacturers, even for the Chinese ones, who will follow suit, if you ask me. Anyways, in what concerns Thailand's main export drivers from this chapter, well, towards South Korea we have new pneumatic tires, and I guess here that South Korea's Hankook Tires brand contributed a lot, while towards India we have natural rubber, so heading 4001. And now, guys, moving on to the last chapter from the export flow, we have here plastics and articles thereof, with some $15.2 billion worth of exports, in which China, Japan and Vietnam were the main destinations. But of course we have other important partners like Indonesia, India or Australia. Mentioning a couple from this top 10 list. In terms of year-on-year changes, all top 10 partners had positive changes, as you can see here, which translated into some 31% in the overall value, almost $3.7 billion, if I were to put a dollar figure to this overall percentage, with very, very good figures coming from Indonesia and India. As for the main drivers, well, towards Japan we have here heading 3923, while towards the Philippines we have heading 3907. And guys, I wouldn't embarrass myself reading the description from this heading, so let's jump to the import flow. And the performer in 2021 was chapter 85. So we're talking here about $53 billion worth of imports, with China here, Japan, and Taiwan as the main partners, which were followed by other important ones like, I don't know, Malaysia, South Korea, or the Philippines, again, to name just a couple. In case you're wondering why Thailand, it's importing from Thailand, well, it's a little bit complicated, but usually when you see a country importing from the same country, this thing is related to processing trade, meaning that, I don't know, in this case, goods are made in Thailand, exported into Viet Nam, and stored at a distribution center, let's say, and then re-imported back to Thailand and used for inward processing materials, which are not subject to import duties or other taxes related to their re-importation. It's a practice done mostly by multinationals in order to help their supply chains. It's more complex than I've tried to summarize here, and maybe in a dedicated video I will cover these topics. So let's get back to the table here and cover the year-on-year changes, which in 2021 were positive, some 22% in relative terms and $9.6 billion in absolute ones, with all the top 10 partners registering positive changes, the largest in absolute terms happening in relation with China, some $4.6 billion. And guys, speaking of China, we see that heading 8517 drove Thailand's imports from this country. So mobile phones, while from Japan we have heading 8542, and we're talking here about electronic integrated circuits. Moving now to Thailand's second largest import driver, we have here Chapter 27, mineral fuels and oils, with $41.3 billion worth of imports for 2021, with the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar as the main partners, followed by other big exporters of energy resources like, I don't know, Australia, the United States, or Angola, to name a couple. And in terms of year-on-year changes, overall we see a 43% positive change in relative terms, some $12.5 billion in absolute ones, with almost all the top 10 partners registering positive figures, except Myanmar here, who had a 7% contraction. As for the main drivers, well, from the United Arab Emirates we have crude petroleum, what else? While from Qatar we have heading 2711, so petroleum gas, and most probably LNG, so liquefied natural gas. Jumping now to, I think it's the third major import driver for Thailand, Chapter 84, with $30 billion worth of imports in 2021, almost 16% more than in 2020, with China, Japan, and the United States as the main trading partners, followed by others like, I don't know, Germany, South Korea, or Indonesia. The overall year-on-year change was positive, $4 billion in absolute terms, with almost all the top 10 partners having positive changes, except the United States, who had a 17% contraction. While on the other side of the spectrum, if you want, China registered the biggest absolute change, a whopping $2.4 billion. And my guess is that there is still room to grow. In what concerns Thailand's main import drivers from this heading chapter, From the United States, we have turbojets, turbopropellers, and other gas turbines, while from India, we have heading 8408. So we're talking about compression ignition internal combustion piston engine for diesel or semi-diesel. Again, on an upward trend if I look at this 2017-2021 interval. So anyways, jumping now to Thailand's fourth biggest import driver, we have here 72 iron and steel with some $15 billion worth of imports for 2021. Japan, China, and South Korea are the top three trading partners, but we have other important ones in this top 10 list like Oman, Malaysia, or the Russian Federation. In terms of year-on-year changes, we have a positive change of roughly 64% in relative terms and almost $6 billion in absolute ones, with all the top 10 partners registering here positive changes. But as you can see here, Japan and China had the largest absolute changes of 2.5 and $1.4 billion respectively. And speaking again of China, the main driver for Thailand's imports in 2021 was flat rolled products of iron or non-alloy steel of a width equal or larger to 600 millimeters, so that's 0.6 meters, while from Oman we have here heading 7207, so semi-finished products of iron or non-alloy steel. And with this fourth chapter being also covered, let's go through the fifth and last chapter. Bear with me for one more minute, please, guys. And we have here chapter 71, which in 2021 registered some $12.5 billion worth of imports, with Switzerland, Hong Kong, and India as the main partners, followed by others like Australia, Laos, or Belgium, again to name a few from this top 10 list. Overall, we have a 54% positive change relative to 2020 figures, translating into almost $4.4 billion, with almost all the top 10 partners having positive figures, except Singapore, whose exports towards Thailand in 2021 shrunk with almost 62%. But on the other opposite side, if you want, we have a huge absolute positive change in relation to Switzerland, who in 2021 exported with some $2.6 billion more than it did the previous year, with heading 7108, so gold, driving most of the exports towards Thailand. And speaking of drivers from India, and guys, with this I'll put an end to this presentation. Diamonds, whether or not worked but not mounted, represented the main export driver towards Thailand in 2021. And guys, with this being said, these were Thailand's main imports and exports drivers. I hope I've managed to give you some useful information. Don't forget to hit the like and the subscribe buttons. Don't be shy, and please do comment. And as usual, until next time, keep your business safe. Thanks.